Hello, everyone. How you doing today? What's new? How's it going? Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Lovely day here. It is autumn. It's starting to feel like autumn. It's October. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, sitting in front of my lovely bookshelf. My lovely, lovely bookshelf. We've got the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela right here. In case you ever want a copy, just call me up. I got one. Was wondering what that book was behind me. And yeah, plenty to talk about today. A lot on my mind. Welcome, 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 welcome. Plenty of unnamed diet beverage. Got a few things on my mind to unload in my opening comments. Let me say that if you are a patron of Caleb Maupin, of myself, if you are one of the people who has signed up on Patreon to support my artistic and journalistic and intellectual efforts, tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, actually Eastern Time, not Eastern Standard Time, right? Eastern Standard Time doesn't start until we turn our clocks back, but Eastern Time, I will be having a patrons-only live stream tonight at 9:30. As soon as I am done on here, I will be sending out the link. I have not sent it out yet because I had to do this one this afternoon. So as soon as we're done here, if you're a patron, I will send out the link, and we will have our patrons-only stream, live stream. It'll be our September one, and then before the end of October, we'll have our October one. But yeah, it'll be good. So if you're a patron, hold tight. Tonight is our patrons-only stream, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Link being sent out shortly after this broadcast ends. Now, on that note, folks, if you haven't hit the like button, be sure to hit the like button. If you have not subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to put this up on your Reddit, put this up on your Twitter. Shout out to two individuals who already, just less than a day after the last stream, cut clips from it and put it online. Great work, folks. Great work. There's two clips from last night's stream, one on one channel, one on another one. Beautiful stuff. I encourage that, right? No copyright on here. If you want to take a clip of me and use it for good purposes and not misrepresent me, but actually have some fun and put it up on your YouTube channel, go for it. Go for it. So that doesn't apply to patrons only streams ever, right? Those are only for patrons. Those are private. But for these public things, if you want to clip it, somebody clipped kind of a joking one about Nazbols. Another person clipped one about Eugene Debs and Daniel DeLeon and the IWW. Great stuff, folks. Great stuff. I love it. You have my permission to do so. I noticed there's another guy who's been cutting up some of my classes and my points and putting video with them. Awesome. The more channels we're on, the better. I think it's great. I'm not opposed. So go for it, folks. This community is growing. This community is growing, and I love it. And we are a little family here. We're a little community. We get on here, and we talk politics, and we talk history, and we talk economics, and we talk world events, and we joke, and we have our running gags about unnamed diet beverage. And, yeah, we got something special going on here, folks. So do your part. Build it, and help this community grow. Kinky always talks about, she remembers when there would be 35 people watching these live streams. 35. I remember when I would feel like I'd accomplished something. If after, a week after my live stream, 500 people had watched. Now, there's not a stream that goes by where we don't have at least 200 people watching live. There's not a stream that goes by that doesn't have at least 2,000 views afterwards. Sometimes we're in the 300s. Sometimes we're in the tens, in the 4,000, 5,000 viewer range. I mean, we're doing great stuff here, folks. We're doing great stuff. We are on fire. We are building this community, but all of us have an important responsibility to build this community because we are doing something really, really special here. Really special. We are, as Jenny Lynn just said, blowing up. We are blowing up. So be very, very excited. If you're a patron, join me this evening. And send a super chat if you want me to address a certain issue. I always address the super chats after my opening remarks here this afternoon. I will jump into answering your super chat questions. And on that note, I will open up with my opening remarks. So, folks, I don't know if folks have seen, I have been watching Frankenstein movies recently. Way to pass the time. Pandemic, not much to do. Hospitals. Writing it down. Hospitals. And I've been watching these Frankenstein movies. I liked the old Frankenstein movies. When I was a kid, I really liked Dracula. I really liked Frankenstein. I really liked those kind of, you can call them horror movies, but you almost don't want to call them horror movies. Because nowadays, horror movies tend to be man chasing beautiful women around with a knife and stabbing them to death, or Saw, or gross stuff. Well, horror movies used to be movies about vampires, movies about zombies, movies about there used to be macabre stories. I guess you can call them gothic, right? That's one term people use for it. But I liked those. Now, I would watch the old Universal Studios ones, the black and white ones with and some of those were okay, but I couldn't really enjoy them. They were a little bit too hokey at times, right? The original Frankenstein was pretty good. The original Dracula I didn't particularly enjoy. The castle at the beginning was nice. But Universal Studios, they did, the 1930s and 40s, Universal Studios was on a monster kick, and they were making these horror movies. But then, about a decade later, starting in the 1950s, going up into the 60s and 70s, a British film studio called Hammer Film Productions, low-budget film studio. They made their own Draculas. They made their own Frankensteins, and those were great. And I discovered them as a child, teenager, and I loved them because they were like the perfect medium, right? There was a decent level of gore, a decent level of sexual content, but it wasn't blood and gore and gross, and it wasn't pornography, but it also wasn't stupid and hokey, right? Like the 1940s ones were. It had a story, it had a plot, there was character development, there was messages, but it still had a modern level of gore, a modern level of sexual content. It was an exciting movie. It wasn't dull, but it wasn't. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it was a perfect medium, right? Christopher Lee, he played Dracula. I believe he holds the record. No one has played Dracula in more movies than Christopher Lee has. Peter Cushing would be Van Helsing or Dr. Frankenstein. Great movies. My favorite of them, my favorite one of all of those movies, is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, directed by Terence Fisher. Masterpiece movie. It is a masterpiece. Frankenstein plays the power-mad intellectual, determined to manipulate the world to serve his own agenda. There's a doctor and his wife that are selling cocaine because they want to raise money for their mother to get surgery, and he finds out about it and blackmails them and starts setting up his laboratory in their basement. It's a thrill a minute. It's a very exciting film. And there's not much monster stuff. There's not really a monster until the end, and he's not exactly a monster. I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's a good movie. It's a suspenseful film, 1969, Terence Fisher, my favorite. Now, this last couple days, I've been, taking my time and making my way through, chunk by chunk, another film that came out the following year from the same film company, Hammer Film Productions. It's called The Horror of Frankenstein. And in this one, it's not Peter Cushing playing Dr. Frankenstein. It's Ralph Bates, the actor. And I actually particularly like Ralph Bates' acting. There's something about him that I particularly like. Ralph Bates is particularly skilled. I enjoy watching Ralph Bates. He's unknown. He's a forgotten actor, right? But he did these horror movies, and he was like a little bit younger, quite a bit younger than Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and he was doing those kind of roles. And he was a really good actor. I enjoy watching Ralph Bates. And Ralph Bates, in his version of the Frankenstein story, the horror of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, is a young, rebellious bad boy of the 1970s era almost. Of course, it takes place in the 1800s. And it's quite enjoyable to watch, and I've always kind of enjoyed these particular movies. There's something about them. It's people in the 1970s with 1970s haircuts pretending they're in the 1800s, vampires, Draculas, you know what I mean? But it doesn't cross a certain line. You don't see naked people. There's no one, there's no flying body parts or ugly mutilation. It's like it doesn't cross a certain line, right? There's a certain line they don't cross where they're trying to make a scary story and they have a plot and they're not trying to completely just gross you out. They're actually just trying to make a good movie. And I enjoy Hammer Film Productions. I don't know why they stopped. I think the company is still in existence, but I guess, for horror movies, right? They're actually horror movies, and that's one thing I like about them. But they actually have a plot, and I've always liked the Hammer Film Productions genre. But that brings me to something I wanted to talk to you all about. Because yes, I fit politics into everything. Into everything, I fit politics into it. Frankenstein. A novel written by Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was married to the famous poet Shelley. He died. She wrote this novel, Frankenstein, which was a hit. It was just widely read all over Europe. It was a big hit. The traditional Marxist reading of the novel Frankenstein, the traditional Marxist reading is that it's an anti-science piece. That this is an attack on modernity. It is a religious film not a religious film, a religious novel telling people, quote, don't play God. It is an opposition to historical progress. Its subtitle is A Modern Prometheus, right? We know the myth of Prometheus from ancient Greece. That's the traditional Marxist and leftist reading of the Frankenstein novel. I disagree with that interpretation of the Frankenstein story. I don't agree with it. The way I see it, the Frankenstein story is an analogy for capitalism. Remember, this is being written amid the Industrial Revolution. At the time, things were being done that had never been done before. Electricity was being harnessed. Railroads were being constructed. Steam engines. All kinds of great inventions were taking place. The world, Europe, and the United States were industrializing. But at the same time that all these modern advances are happening, all kinds of people's lives were being destroyed. Right? Peasants, under feudalism, they'd always had a place on the land. They lived on the land, they died on the land. Under capitalism, suddenly they're wage slaves. And if they don't get hired by a boss, they starve. Right? There's sweatshops, children being worked to death in factories. There's, all kinds of horrors of the brave new world created by capitalism. Feudalism is ripped apart. Machinery, technology, the means of production are advancing. But on some level, we've lost an element of our humanity. That is the message of the story, right? So you have Dr. Frankenstein. And Dr. Frankenstein does something that has never been done before. He creates a person with dead body parts, and he creates a person. Lightning, all this, he creates a person. And he's so in awe of his scientific achievement, he forgets that this person he created is a person. And he never gives this person any affection, never gives this person any love. The person he creates is brought into the world without any care, without any concern. And as a result, that person he creates becomes a monster that inflicts terror onto humanity. that is the message of the film, and he ends up chasing him to Antarctica or something. And I mean, why do I keep saying film? That is the message of the novel. It is an analogy for the fact that as we seem to have gained the world in terms of industrial advancement, in terms of invention, in terms of advancing the means of production, we've lost our soul. It's very similar to the message in Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, Les Miserables, right? It's very similar to the message you'll find in the writings of Charles Dickens. It's very similar to, all kinds of art that's coming out during that time. It's not explicitly socialist. It's just bemoaning the hardships and the horrors that capitalism has created. That's basically what it is, and it is a critique of capitalism, arguing that we have lost. It's kind of like the Communist Manifesto. The opening section of the Communist Manifesto is all about how capitalism has carried out great advances, but in the process of those advances, they have left no remaining nexus between man and man but callous cash payment. Right? It's about how the ties that bound people together, right? The relationships, all these things are torn apart. We have a world where money comes first, and human beings are left irrelevant, meaningless. That's what the point of the Frankenstein novel is about. Now, you could argue that is a reactionary message, right? Because if you don't have socialism in there, if you're not saying we can get beyond this and get to a higher stage of socialism, what does that really just lead to? It leads to feudal nostalgia, right? Oh, remember the good old days when there were serfs and peasants and everyone knew their place? And we know that feudalism was horrible. Feudalism was awful. It was a horrible system. But if you don't have Marxist consciousness, if you don't have Marxism, you don't have dialectical and historical materialism, all you can do in reaction to the brave new world created by capitalism is say, oh, can't we go backward? And of course, that's reactionary. So you can argue that maybe Frankenstein is reactionary, but in its process of being reactionary, it's pointing toward truth. Truth about how capitalism works, truth about the horrors of the world that the free market had created, not offering a solution, mind you. And Victor Hugo is like that. Les Miserables, people have seen the movie, people have seen the 1960s musical of it. People think Les Miserables by Victor Hugo is a revolutionary Marxist work. It is not, right? I mean, there is a student uprising in the novel, but they portray the students as naive. The message of Victor Hugo's masterpiece is basically the modern world of France is so awful, and we need religion, and we just need to be religious and be nice to each other, because it gives you, with Jean Valjean running from the Inspector Javert, it gives you a tour of France, post overthrow of feudalism, post revolutionary France, and all the horrors of the brave new world. And of course, the revolutionary intelligentsia is an aspect of French society during that time. So of course it touches on that. But it portrays the revolutionary intelligentsia as foolish and naive. It portrays the horrors of modern France as being based on a lack of religion and a lack of kindness and a lack of compassion. The Les Miserables novel is, in essence, kind of a feudal nostalgia novel. If we could all just get back to the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity and religion, everything would be fine, right? In the brave new world of modern capitalism, and it points to the irony that law and morality don't line up. That's kind of the point of the story, too, is that morality and law do not line up, and that Inspector Javert, right, is a bit of a nut because he thinks law and morality, he's like obsessed with the law. But it's not really, in essence, a progressive story. Now, the 1960s musical, do we hear the people sing and barricades and all that? You would think that's what it is. But that was a reflection of the time, right? You have to remember what was happening in France in May of '68 and what was happening around the world in response to the Vietnam War. And, the more recent Hollywood movie with Russell Crowe, the Broadway musical, etc. That's a totally different thing. That is absolutely not what Victor Hugo was talking about. you know, it's the same theme in Frankenstein, though. It's the same theme in Charles Dickens' novels. It's this kind of bemoaning of the lack of morality, the lack of kindness, the lack of brotherhood among people in the brave new world of capitalism. And it's kind of looking on in horror at man's inhumanity to man. That's basically the message of it. That's what Frankenstein is really about. And so I've been reflecting on that as I watch the 1970s Hammer Frankensteins, which I do enjoy. I do enjoy them. Ralph Bates, great actor. Peter Cushing, great actor. I will give Ralph Bates a little bit more of a shout out because Ralph Bates is unknown, right? I mean, Google him now. I mean, he's got a Wikipedia page, but, say to people, hey, look, I met Ralph Bates once. People are going to go, who? It's Ralph Bates, I believe, is an unsung cinematic legend. But that said, I will say that the Hammer films are an acquired taste, right? I mean, because of unique circumstances in my life, I started getting the VHS tapes of them when I was a teenager from the library and really enjoying them. But to be fair, the Hammer films, I mean, you have to really kind of develop a taste for them. I think the first one I ever saw, Pioneer Youth Groups. First one of those films I ever saw was actually the Brides of Dracula, and that was a particularly good movie, I thought. Peter Cushing is in it. It's pretty decent. One thing that I thought was amusing is I've watched a few of the documentaries about how the Hammer films were created, and I watched a few of those documentaries, and what I thought was amusing about them was that there's one particular moment where I just died laughing, right? We've all seen like what they call the mockumentaries, where it's like, what is it? There's one called A Mighty Wind, and there's one called This Is Spinal Tap, and we watched The Office. There are quite a few what you could call mockumentaries now, which are documentaries, but they're not really. They're like fake documentaries that are intended to be funny. And, I was watching an actual documentary about the Hammer films of the 1960s. And at one point, they're interviewing one of these guys, and he's talking about some radio host who they started having play Dracula later after Christopher Lee kind of stopped doing it. And what was very funny, very, very funny, was so they're talking about this radio host who started playing Dracula, and they're interviewing him, and he's like, yes, we thought that he kind of wanted to be a Dracula. It was a little bit strange, but he was a jolly good actor. And they cut to like an image of this guy in his Dracula costume, like at the park, at the picnic with his wife and kids, and he's like in a Dracula costume. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. It was like, it sounded like satire to me, but apparently it was serious. And we thought he might actually want to be a Dracula. I died laughing. I thought that was particularly funny. But on another note, folks, before we get to the super chats, before we do our roll call, just pouring a little more unnamed diet beverage, I did want to mention that apocalyptic, is that a term? Apocalyptic? Well, apocalyptic themes have become a big part of leftism nowadays. And I don't think that's good. I really don't think that's good. Right? I don't know if folks know the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s hit song from Germany, 99 Red Balloons. Right? Fun to listen to, great song. I know people know that I read to you the article by William Hinton, where he says that the Gang of Four in China were predicting a global war in which, half of humanity would die. Well, I recently came across the promotional film that the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, the Bobavakian group, produced in 1987. They say they will. It's actually on YouTube. You can watch it. And it's amusing to watch. It was entertaining for me because the RCP doesn't talk that way no more, right? I mean, they're talking about Mao, they're talking about the Gang of Four, and they're talking about, they don't talk that way no more. right? And there's interviews. It doesn't just feature the great leader Bob Avakian. I'm saying that with sarcasm. It also features, some of their other members like Carl Dix, like Joe Veal, like Dolly Veal, and you see more of the organization. It's about an hour long. I'm watching this, but the film is called They Say They Will, and it's all about there's going to be a nuclear war. There's going to be a big nuclear war. There's going to be a nuclear holocaust unless we have a Maoist communist revolution in the United States. And it's an apocalyptic film. It's dark. And there's nothing in there about workers being exploited on the job. There's nothing in there about economics. It's all just there's going to be a big, huge nuclear war, but we're going to stop it by having a big, crazy communist revolution. And you watch it, and it's just kind of like it's a lot like 99 Red Balloons. It's a lot like that stuff I read you from the Gang of Four. That apocalyptic imagery on the left, I find that to be particularly problematic, right? That optimism, Marxism is an optimistic ideology. It says that we are going to get beyond the horrors of capitalism and we're going to build socialism. And with socialism, with the strength of socialism, with human reason controlling the economy, not the anarchy of production, we're going to get to that ultimate stage eventually of communism. A world in which there is no coercion, and there's no need for any government or state power. It's a particularly optimistic ideology. Marxism is optimistic. It's about getting to a world beyond capitalism. It's about making a better life for everyone on the planet. It's about having a society that's much more organized and rational, and much more disciplined and much more ordered than the world we live in now. Meanwhile, when you look at a lot of 1960s, 70s, and 80s leftists, you get the complete opposite message. We're all going to die from nuclear war. We want to unleash and foment chaos. It is a completely different message. And, I put out the book on Kamala Harris, right? This is available. Selling like hotcakes. Been doing a lot of interviews about it. But in this essay, I talk about how leftist politics has been distorted. And this book on Kamala Harris that I wrote is a preview of the bigger book that I've written, the much bigger book I've written. It's being edited and I'm changing lots of it. It's a masterpiece. It's a big, long work I've written called The Synthetic Left, How the CIA Ruined American Socialism and What to Do About It. And that book is very big, and it's got a bibliography that's very, very long, and it's got a lot of quotes and a lot. It's my pandemic magnum opus, I guess, that I've written, and I'm finishing it. But this is just kind of an introduction, right? This is this little essay that I wrote. It's very short, right? It's 133 pages. Got some pictures in there. It's my essay on Kamala Harris. It has the same theme, but a lot less content, a lot less development about what is wrong with leftism and socialism and how it's been distorted over the course of the Cold War and what we can do about it. And I use Kamala Harris's life in particular to make that point. That's what this book is about. But when you really get down to it, what you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia, the people in Les Miserables, those kids in bars singing "Do We Hear the People Sing" and dreaming of barricades and explosions and wanting to wave red flags, and that strata of society, which is always present under capitalism, the utopian middle-class youth, the revolutionary intelligentsia, has been hijacked to serve imperialism. Meanwhile, socialism has become a mechanism for countries in the developing world to raise themselves up out of poverty, and that actually existing socialism has a conservative edge to it in many cases because it's offering stability, and that the revolutionary intelligentsia and its drive for chaos has been hijacked by the imperialists, by Zbigniew Brzezinski, by the Hillary Clinton State Department, while at the same time, socialism has in the countries where socialism has taken power, it has begun to offer a kind of oneness, a kind of spiritual conservatism and brotherhood of mankind that one associates with religion and with the right wing. So that's what's happened over the course of the Cold War, is that that leftism and what it means to be a leftist and what it means to be a Marxist and a scientific socialist, what it means to believe in capitalism, what it means to believe in socialism, has all gotten all jumbled up right? At the beginning of capitalism, at the beginning of the Paris Commune of 1871, in Marx's lifetime, wanting to have rational order and plan out the economy, and being a young, cafe, pub, drinking, middle class radical waving the red flag walked hand in hand. The revolutionary intelligentsia's drive for chaos and the need of society for order in response to the anarchy of production, they walked hand in hand. Now they do not. They no longer walk hand in hand. The imperialists have hijacked the revolutionary intelligentsia and are using it to stage revolutions, color revolutions, to destabilize the world. Meanwhile, socialism in power has been a vehicle for Eurasia, the Eurasian hemisphere, the opposition to Atlanticism, to assert itself, to raise itself up, and to bring it to power, and it often presents itself in a conservative way. And I wrote City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. Now I've got this book on Kamala Harris, and this is the thesis that I have really come to understand. China's people don't admire President Xi Jinping because he can make China more chaotic. China's people admire President Xi Jinping because he can stabilize China. He's offering order. He handled the pandemic very, very well. That socialism presents itself in a kind of conservative way, whereas the revolutionary intelligentsia that longs for chaos and destruction has become a tool of the imperialists. That's kind of the thesis that I've developed, and spending years as a revolutionary activist, as someone who's part of Occupy Wall Street, as someone who was part of, the Trayvon Martin protests in New York City, and part of so much, that went on here, and was in Baltimore in 2015 when the explosion happened. I was there, and someone who's then traveled and been to Iran, and been to Venezuela, and been to Brazil, and been to Ecuador, and been to Russia, and I'm telling you that this is the problem of the current time we live in. So on that note, a couple lives ago, I actually decided I was going to read to you the second chapter of the Kamala Harris book. And I didn't read the whole thing because it was just too long. So I figured for the rest of my opening remarks, I would finish the second chapter of the Kamala Harris book. And maybe after this, we'll cut it up and I'll put the entire second chapter into one YouTube video. So I'll do that, then we'll do our roll call, and then from there I'll answer your super chats, and then I will go have my daily, I'll send out the link, first of all, to the patrons only live stream. I'll go have my daily jog and get myself all sweaty. I'll come back, I'll shower, and I'll chill, and then at 9:30 we'll have our patrons only live stream, and that'll be a lovely Sunday in pandemic New York City. So yeah, I figure I'll read the rest of the second chapter of the Kamala Harris book. Yeah. Across the planet, one can see the great construction projects and achievements carried out by communists and socialists in the developing world. The largest irrigation system was constructed by the Islamic Socialist government of Libya. The Dnieper Dam, constructed in the Soviet Union's first 5-year plan, was the largest hydroelectrical power plant in the world at the time, and it was completed in 1931. It brought electricity to Ukraine and other parts of the Soviet Union. The largest power plant in the Middle East, the Aswan Dam, constructed by the Arab socialist leader Abdel Nasser in coordination with the Soviet Union, brought electricity to all of Egypt. The China-Pakistan Friendship Highway is one of the longest and highest elevated roads on Earth. It was built by Chinese communists determined to free their country from the economic isolation that followed the Sino-Soviet split. The highway laid the basis for the origins of the now flourishing China-Pakistan economic corridor. The Soviet space program was the result of the combined efforts of millions in World War. It was socialist central planning that launched the first satellites and put the first person into orbit. The Cuban healthcare system is widely described as one of the greatest in the world. Cuba's medical school that trains doctors from other countries is also widely praised. The largest hydroelectrical power plant in the world today is the Three Gorges Dam in China, built as part of the Communist Party's efforts to reduce poverty and increase living standards in rural areas. Many more examples could be given. The achievements of socialism are vast, but the achievements were not conducted on the basis of unleashing anger and seeking punitive revenge. The achievements of socialism were the results of mass mobilizations of the population in a spirit of collectivism. Across Eastern Europe, communists led the reconstruction efforts following the Second World War, paving roads, building hospitals, and raising countries to a higher level of industrialization and living standards they had never experienced. The post-war years in Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and other countries liberated by Soviet troops from Nazi invaders are remembered as years of great optimism. Following the Second World War, the Soviet Union pushed communist, anti-imperialist, and democratic youth groups around the world to establish the World Democratic Youth Federation. Young people from different countries who had seen the carnage of war took this pledge. We pledge that we shall remember this unity, forged in this month, November 1945. Not only today, not only this week, this year, but always. Until we have built the world we have dreamed and fought for, we pledge ourselves to build the unity of the youth of the world, all races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs, to eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth, to build a deep and sincere international friendship among the peoples of the world, to keep a lasting peace, to eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness. We have come to confirm the unity of all youth, salute our comrades who have died, and pledge our word that our skillful hands, keen brains, and young enthusiasm shall never be wasted in a war. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. Every 4 years, a world festival of youth and students was convened by the socialist, communist, and anti-imperialist and anti-fascist youth in order to encourage this spirit of human solidarity and unity. And I actually included some pictures from some of the early world festivals of youth and students. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. All righty. In the early years of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party had an internal debate about the way forward. The country was still recovering from the horrendous civil war. Millions of people had died when 15 different countries invaded the Soviet Union in the hopes of overturning the revolution. Stalin favored a program of socialism in one country. Trotsky proposed a program of the permanent revolution. All right, state capitalist notion. All right, writing it down. In essence, Stalin sought to appeal to the collective desires of the Soviet people for a better life, while Trotsky's program sought to continue to unleash rage and vengeance, striving for a global revolutionary conflagration. The peoples of the Soviet Union were weary of war, and Trotsky's program of militarizing the life of factory workers and peasants was unappealing to the population, though many hardline Bolsheviks were mistakenly attached to it. Speaking on January 25, 1921, Stalin criticized the permanent revolution concept, saying, quote, "A group of party workers headed by Trotsky, intoxicated by the successes achieved by military methods in the army, supposes that those methods can and must be adopted among the workers in the trade unions in order to achieve similar successes in strengthening the unions and in reviving industry. But this group forgets that the army and the working class are two different spheres, that a method that is suitable for the army may prove to be unsuitable, harmful for the working class and for the trade unions." Joseph Stalin was a mass organizer who had been educated in a seminary. He was known for appealing to quite different sentiments among the people. Long before the Bolshevik Revolution, Trotsky had observed this aspect of Stalin with scorn. Historian Simon Sebag Montefiore writes in his biography, Young Stalin, about the organizing style of Russia's future man of steel. The workers listened reverently to this young preacher, and it was no coincidence that many revolutionaries were seminarists and often pious ex-peasants. Trotsky, agitating in another city, remembered that many of the workers had thought the movement resembled early Christians and had to be taught that they should be atheists. Montefiore describes how the Bolshevik leader became highly popular when locked in prison alongside non-political criminals. Stalin was the kingpin of Batumi prison, dominating his friends, terrorizing the intellectuals, suborning the guards, and befriending the criminals. Stalin was hostile to bumptious intellectuals, but he was less so with the educated worker revolutionaries who did not arouse his inferiority complex. He played the teacher, the priest. Trotsky and Western intellectuals who favored permanent revolution incarnated the mindset of the revolutionary intelligentsia, who viewed the industrialization of the USSR with disgust. They denounced Stalin as socially conservative, conducting a thermidor in the family, and then saw the moment when the population was mobilized to construct the USSR as becoming a, quote, degenerate workers' state. However, the words of Tatiana Fedorova and the millions of other Soviet people who saw their homeland built into an industrial fortress that was strong enough to eventually withstand a fascist invasion, tell a different story. In contemporary Russia, Stalin is far more popular than Lenin. Many anti-communists look up to Stalin for his building up of the country. When Stalin built the mausoleum for Lenin and declared the ideology of the Communist Party to be Marxism-Leninism, many noted the orthodox religious influence on the propaganda of the new state. Speaking at Lenin's memorial meeting, Stalin spoke of communists not as chaos creators, executioners, or vandals, but as a group of people dedicated to living selflessly for the purpose of reinventing mankind. Comrades, we communists are made from a special mold. We are made of special stuff. We are those who form the army of the great proletarian strategist, Comrade Lenin. There is nothing higher than the honor of belonging to this army. There is nothing higher than the title of a member of the party whose founder and leader was Comrade Lenin. It is not given to everyone to be a member of such a party. It is the sons of the working class, the sons of want and struggle, the sons of incredible privation and heroic effort, who before all should be members of such a party. That is why the party of Leninists, the party of communists, is called the party of the working class. In his text, Civilization and Its Discontents, Sigmund Freud speaks with contempt for the feelings his religious friends described to him. He writes, "It is a feeling with which we would like to call a sensation of eternity, a feeling as something limitless and unbounded, as it were oceanic. This feeling," he adds, "is a purely subjective factor and not an article of faith. It brings with it no assurance of personal immortality, but a source of religious energy seized upon by various churches and religious systems, directed by them into particular channels, and doubtless exhausted by them. One may, he thinks, rightly call himself religious on the grounds of this oceanic feeling, even if one rejects every faith and every illusion." Freud speaks of these feelings with contempt, viewing them as a leftover from a previous stage of human evolution, when we were closer to termites or wolves in a pack and had not developed the individualism that defines mankind. He writes, "I can imagine that the oceanic feeling became connected with religion later on. The oneness with the universe that constitutes its identational content sounds like the first attempt at religious consolation, as though it were another way of disclaiming the danger which the ego recognizes as threatening it from the external world." However, Freud does not seem to realize that it is this sense of oneness and belonging in a community, of a desire to be part of a joint effort and cause greater than oneself, that laid the basis for the achievements not just of socialism, but of all human civilization. Human beings are collective in nature, and our progress as a species has been defined by the cultivation of a collective mindset and joint effort to achieve a higher purpose. When socialism took power across the world during the 20th century, it broke with the destructiveness of the revolutionary intelligentsia. While revolutionaries utilized the anger and releasing of impulses to take power, the Bolsheviks the Chinese Communist Party, the Baathists, and the Bolivarians won the loyalty of populations by unleashing collectivism and solidarity. Interestingly, the New Testament describes a similar feeling among the early years of the Christian church. Quote, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courtrooms. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their numbers daily those who were being saved." That's Acts 4, 42, 47. Now, the man who probably had the greatest responsibility for the victory of the United States in the Cold War, aside from Henry Kissinger, was Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was a Polish-born anti-communist who hated Russians on an ethnic level, based on hundreds of years of tension between Poland and Russia. Brzezinski studied first in Montreal and then at Harvard University, always focusing on how to roll back the influence of the Soviet Union. Brzezinski emphasized the concept of peaceful engagement with the socialist countries of Eastern Europe. He urged the U.S. government to back away from hardline, doctrinaire anti-communism and to instead focus on manipulating communists against each other. He became a principal strategist in the Cold War, advising U.S. presidents such as Kennedy, Johnson, and Reagan. Jimmy Carter called himself a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski worked intensely with Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission to develop a new strategy for defeating communism in the aftermath of the U.S. defeat in Vietnam. He was appointed as Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Ronald Reagan awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. During the Vietnam War, many young leftists had begun to identify with the peasants of Vietnam fighting the foreign occupiers. The USA was viewed as an authoritarian force of tanks and planes, while the Vietnamese National Liberation Front was impoverished farmers fighting in the jungles to defend their villages. Brzezinski deduced that it was necessary to hijack these sentiments that Vietnamese communists had tapped into in their global public relations campaign, opposing the presence of U.S. troops. The idea was to set up the Afghan trap, to give the Soviet Union, quote, their own Vietnam. In an interview with a French newspaper, Brzezinski explained his thinking. Quote, question, "Despite that risk, were you an advocate of covert action? Perhaps you yourself desired the Soviet entry into the war to look for a way to provoke it?" Brzezinski: "It wasn't quite like that. We didn't push the Russians to intervene, but we knowingly increased the probability that they would." Question: "When the Soviets justified their intervention by asserting that they intended to fight against secret U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, nobody believed them. However, there was an element of truth in this. You don't regret that today." Brzezinski: "Regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap. You want me to regret it? The day that the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, essentially, we now have the opportunity of giving the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on a war that was unsustainable for the regime, a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire. Neither do you regret having supported Islamic fundamentalism, which has given arms and advice to future terrorists?" Brzezinski responds, what is more important in world history, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire, some agitated Muslims, or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War? That's an actual interview with Zbigniew Brzezinski. CBS News was caught airing staged battle footage to make the Islamic extremists fighting the Soviet Union, led by a young Osama bin Laden, look like romantic freedom fighters. The fake footage was exposed by the Columbia School of Journalism Review and the New York Post. In 1989, the Associated Press confirmed the reports. Most of the footage was shot by cameraman Mike Hoover, who allegedly staged scenes of guerrilla sabotage and made a Chinese-built Pakistani jet on a training run appear to be a Soviet plane bombing Afghan villages. The 1987 film, The Living Daylights, was dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan. By appealing to the leftist aesthetics with slick propaganda, the Western imperialists could defeat the communists. Covert manipulation of leftist politics, which began with the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, escalated. Zbigniew Brzezinski famously coined the term Euro-communists in reference to the fact that in 1978, the French, Italian, and Spanish communist parties denounced the Soviet Union's foreign policy, echoing the very allegations against the USSR made by the U.S. State Department. This had been the result of decades of covert manipulation. Academics had a great deal of influence in European communist parties. They received grant money from CIA-linked foundations and were carefully nudged to emphasize social liberalism and move in an anti-Stalinist direction. The Frankfurt School, covertly supported by the CIA from the early 1950s, emphasized the need to focus on intellectuals, not the working class, and combined Freudian psychoanalysis with Marxism, focusing on cultural criticism. The writings of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist who wrote coded notebooks from within a fascist prison, were pushed to the front, while the texts of Marx and Lenin were ignored. The idea that the Soviet Union was made up of, quote, red fascists and, quote, totalitarians who had betrayed the ideals of workers' democracy and, quote, permanent revolution was covertly financed and pushed into leftist circles. Figures associated with the Congress for Cultural Freedom and Partisan Review became iconic voices for the new left that viewed working people as a mob of inferior rabble who threatened the independence of intellectuals. Susan Sontag declared in an essay called Fascinating Fascism, written for the New York Times Review of Books, that many aspects of the USSR and the Eastern Bloc were somehow fascist. She wrote, fascism also stands for an ideal, or rather ideals, that are persistent today under other banners, ideals of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the dissolution of alienation in the ecstatic feelings of community, the family of man, extravagant effort and the endurance of pain, the massing of groups of people, the turning of people into things, the multiplication and replication of things and grouping of people around an all-powerful hypnotic leader figure or force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, mass athletic demonstrations, a choreography of displayed bodies are all valued activities in totalitarian countries. The art of the gymnast, so popular now in Eastern Europe, also evokes recurrent features of fascist aesthetics, the holding in or confining of force, military precision. In essence, Sontag argued that because the Marxist-Leninist governments mobilized their populations and unleashed a spirit of selflessness and community, they were inherently fascist. To Sontag, whose career began with the CIA-backed Partisan Review, leftist politics was simply about unleashing impulses and protecting the individuality of intellectuals. When Brzezinski helped to stage an uprising among dock workers in Poland against the Marxist-Leninist government, many in the confused American leftist movement supported these anti-communist protests. Aside from a few hardliners, such as the Communist Party USA or the Workers' World Party, labeled Stalinists and tankies by their detractors, the Western left embraced what was later proven to be a CIA operation to destabilize socialism in Poland. At a New York City rally of Trotskyites, hippies, anarchists, and other leftists who backed the Solidarity movement in Poland, Susan Sontag proclaimed, quote, "Communism is fascism, successful fascism, if you will. What we have called fascism, rather, the form of tyranny that can be overthrown, that has largely failed. I repeat, not only is fascism and overt military rule the probable destiny of all communist societies, but communism in itself is a variant, the most successful variant of fascism. Fascism with a human face." The entire nature of left-wing politics had been changed and remains completely distorted right up to today. It is this distortion that made possible the rise of Kamala Harris. All right, sorry, a super chat went by. What was it? Can someone repeat it? I missed it. Missed the super chat, and then I'll finish it. Missed the super chat. Someone show me the super chat I missed. What was it? What was the super chat I missed? Someone tell me what it is. What was the super chat I missed? What was your workout routine? Okay. Workout routine. All right. Writing it down. All right. Okay. All righty. And we're almost done with the chapter that I will read you. Across Eastern Europe, in China, and in many other places, the socialist governments were represented on U.S. television as tanks, faceless, cruel, metallic machines. Meanwhile, the U.S.-aligned dissidents were portrayed as free thinkers, intellectuals, and idealists. The Marxist-Leninist regimes were portrayed as militarists, crushing peace-loving hippies who wanted freedom. But underneath the New Left's rejection of class struggle, economic analysis, and the embracing of freedom as an ideal was contempt and fear of the common people. Hannah Arendt, one of the most definitive New Left thinkers on totalitarianism, wrote a piece entitled "Eichmann in Jerusalem," a report on the banality of evil. The piece focuses on Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal abducted by Mossad and executed in Jerusalem for his crimes against Jews during the Holocaust. Arendt's text goes to great length to describe how much of a typical human being Eichmann was. The text is widely read to be a warning against conformity and, quote, just following orders. However, another implication is beneath Arendt's contempt for Eichmann as a joiner who had been part of the YMCA before he joined the Nazi Party. The implication is that deep down, ordinary, working-class people are potential Nazis. The implication is that every barrier must be erected to restrain and control the ignorant rabble, to protect the enlightened few. The implication is also that those who would rally the masses to fight for their interests against the elite and against the wealthy ruling class are inherently dangerous, even if their organizing takes place on the basis of a revolutionary, progressive platform. In the minds that make up the entity, which is rightly called the synthetic left, the broad masses of people must be controlled and restrained. Social engineering, deceptive propaganda, a surveillance apparatus, and a police state all are necessary to make sure that they never begin to assert their wishes. Prior to the Second World War, socialism and communism in the United States were considered to be populist movements. They fought for the working people against the ruling elite. They built solidarity between different races with slogans like "Black and White, Unite and Fight." They built unemployment councils and labor unions to win economic justice, waging a class struggle on behalf of the working class against the exploiting capitalist elite. Sigmund Freud, beloved by the Frankfurt School, who somehow combined the worldview of an anti-communist with Marxism, was quite outspoken in his contempt for ordinary people and the morals by which they lived. Freud's text, Civilization and Its Discontents, goes as far as to mock the golden rule of Christianity. Love your neighbor as yourself. Freud writes, "Why should we do it? What good will it do us? But above all, how shall we achieve it? How can it be possible? My love is something valuable to me, which I ought not throw away without reflection. It imposes duties on me, for whose fulfillment I must make sacrifices." Freud writes that much of the mental illness of the world is rooted around guilt, in natural feelings of selfishness and aggression, which cannot be overcome. He writes, "I remember my own defensive attitude when the idea of an instinct of destruction first emerged in psychoanalytic literature, and how long it took before I became receptive to it. For little children do not like it when there is talk of an inborn human inclination to badness, to aggressiveness, and to destruction, and so to cruelty. The commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself, is the strongest defense against human aggressiveness, and an excellent example of the unpsychological proceedings of the cultural superego. The commandment is impossible to fulfill. Anyone who follows such a precept in present-day civilization only puts himself at danger and disadvantage to the person who disregards it. In the absence of class solidarity and economic notions of socialism as central planning and construction, many have noted that leftism has largely degenerated into a form of victimology. Various forms of oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, mistreatment of the disabled, body shaming, etc., are denounced and studied in great depth. In left-wing discourse, individuals are given permission to feel that they have been victimized for unfairness and to unleash their rage. They get to satisfy their impulse toward aggression by exacting revenge for their perceived oppression. So, how did Kamala Harris grow up among the anti-racist activists, aware of the legacy of Jim Crow and the injustices of the U.S. legal system, and yet become a sadistic perpetrator for mass incarceration? Because we cannot expect her to love her neighbor as herself or feel empathy for her victims. The liberation of a woman of color who has clearly suffered great hardship and injustice in her life is enacted by the lifting of moral restraints and the allowing of her to act out her rage. According to the logic of the Frankfurt School cultural critics, the postmodernists, Sigmund Freud, and other pseudo-leftists who view Marxism merely as a vehicle for deconstruction, Kamala Harris's life is a beautiful thing. A person from a historically marginalized group has become empowered to unleash her rage onto the world. The myths that once held society together and restrained such behavior have been deconstructed. The psychology of the revolutionary intelligentsia, when stripped of any scientific Marxist ideology, the mindset of angry crowds screaming around the guillotine, has become incarnated in an age where Twitter anger and wokeness has replaced the notion of human progress. Kamala Harris is the logical conclusion of a long process of distorting leftist politics and reducing it to a crude Freudian manipulation. And that is the second chapter of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. Fun times. Fun times. So, folks, we got a few super chats here, not many. So if you want me to answer something, by all means, shoot me a super chat. But that concludes my opening remarks. So I'm going to open another bottle of unnamed diet beverage. And on that note, let's do our roll call. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Australia. Washington State, Richmond, Virginia, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, Greece, England, France, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Brazil, Belize, Mansfield, Southern Illinois, Switzerland, Edinburgh, Scotland, Dallas, Brian Schaefer in Illinois, Nepal, very good, Washington, D.C., Sensible Socialist, Johnny from Canada, Houston, Christopher, Denver, Colorado, Hungary, Alex in Salem, Oregon, Alex Giovanni, New Zealand, Dayton, Ohio, Majori Williams, welcome, Newark, New Jersey, Southeast London, United Kingdom, New Hampshire, Portugal, Northern Ireland, Alice, Ohio, 2 hours from Wexner's Mansion, Zaragoza, Spain, Chicago, Independence, Missouri, Occupied Ireland, Aberdeen, Scotland. Mark, welcome. Norway, Arctic Angel. We're going to do things my way or Norway. Mike from Oxmal. Palo Round Mountain, California. Naples, Florida. Welcome. PRC. People's Republic of China. Antoine from France. Hamburg, Germany. Shami Shu. Ireland, Poland, California, Utah, Germany, Melbourne, David Luan. Thank you for the super chat, David. Leipzig, formerly the better Germany. Maryland, very good. Stuart Becker in Dallas, Texas. Genosha Island. Northport, Florida. Jerusalem, Israel. DC suburbs. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York. Welcome, as always, Shaniqua. Tim in Liverpool, UK. Always a regular as well. All right, folks. Who else is with us today? Evan from Timmins. Dennis Prager is here from hell. Jerusalem, Palestine. What's in Israel? Oh boy. Chicago, says Last Bastion Red. Whole world is here, says Harold Sullivan. All right. I've got a few super chats here. And if you got more super chat questions, I will answer them. So let's do it. All right, first one was about the bombing of hospitals in Armenia. Well, that conflict that's going on is absolutely disgusting to me. Turkey is playing a very, very negative role, and my hope is that Russia is able to, stabilize things and end this fighting, because it's not good at all. And Turkey's behavior is deeply unprincipled, and not in favor of what's going on there. The bombing of hospitals, horrendous stuff. It's got to stop. All right, pioneer youth groups. I've actually gotten to know a lot of pioneer youth groups. I hung out with the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union of Vietnam. I hung out with the Kim Il Sung Youth of North Korea. These were at World Communist Youth gatherings. When I was in Ecuador, the young Bolivarian socialists of Ecuador, they actually in the morning they get together and do karate. They have karate training. There's a special karate martial arts that the Correa government, Rafael Correa's government, pushed in Ecuador. There's the Bolivarian youth of Venezuela. There's the young pioneers and the Komsomols of Russia. There's in China they have the young pioneers. They're called the kids who wear the red scarves. In China, my understanding is that when you go to kindergarten, Oh, cooperatives. Okay, we'll talk about cooperatives. When you go to kindergarten, they give you a red scarf to symbolize your membership in the Young Pioneers Club, and that they tell you that is your own little piece of the Chinese flag, and the red stands for the blood of all who have died to build the homeland. And it's pretty powerful stuff, right? Very, very exciting stuff. The idea is to make young people feel enthusiastic about their country, to have them want to be part of a project of building a better country, to give them that feeling of oneness, to be part of something big. That's the idea. Thank you, David. What's interesting is Americans, the way we're trained to look at that. I've made this point many times before, but it needs to be made again. The way we're trained to look at that, we look at Bolivarian youth in Venezuela, Ho Chi Minh youth in Vietnam, Komsomols in Russia, or, more recently the Nashi summer camps, or the young pioneers of China, or the Islamic youth of the Bolivar of Iran, or, the way we Americans are trained to look at that. We say, look, these young people are brainwashed. They're being brainwashed. This is a horrible, horrible thing those regimes are doing. They're brainwashing these young people, right? They're brainwashing them. But what's interesting is, I've done this. Other people have done this. National Geographic does this. They go around with maps. They walk up to random people on the street, and they say, hey, can you find this country on a map? North Korea, the United States itself, America's young people who go to America's schools, where they aren't brainwashed, right? They're not brainwashed in America's schools. Oh, no. Think for yourself. Cannot find their own country on a map. And they certainly can't find the countries we're bombing on a map. But we're free. But I can guarantee you that all the Komsomols, all the young pioneers of China, all the Bolivarian youth of Latin America, all the Islamic youth of Iran, they can all find their country on a map. They can all find the United States on a map. But we're free and they're brainwashed. Favorite science fiction novels? Science fiction. Right? Folks, think for yourself has become an excuse for not thinking at all. My whole life, I've encountered people who, when you're out, I used to do a lot more leafleting and newspaper selling and stuff. Hey, would you like a leaflet? No, I can't read that. I'm too busy thinking for myself. Oh, okay, you think for yourself. That's what's so bizarre. Right? In other countries, yes, the state puts out its viewpoint. The state believes in whatever, its ideology, it puts it out. People know that. The United States, no. Every American thinks for themselves. They're totally free. Just so happens they come up with the exact same conclusions as everyone else. They hate all the countries that the U.S. government tells them to hate. They believe in all the principles. People here are brainwashed and don't realize it. It's ridiculous. People walk around and I think for myself is the mantra. If you want to know somebody is just the most blind, conformist, true believer in Western capitalism, what they'll tell you is, I think for myself. I watch both CNN and Fox. I think for myself. And, it's really pathetic, right? And, the young people in Venezuela, the Australian socialist Twitter, I'll have to check her out. Thanks. The young people of these countries where the young people are supposed to be brainwashed and all of that, they have a much better idea of what's going on in the world. So, yeah, that's all I can say about that. And that, every society trains young people in the ideas and the principles of that society, except in the United States, we say we don't. Other countries are honest about it. Right? If you're going to live in China, go to school in China. Okay, Gramsci. We'll talk about Gramsci. You live in China, everyone knows that your kids are going to go to school and they're going to learn You're going to learn communism. They're going to learn the Chinese Communist Party line. Kids go to school in Iran, they're going to learn, the Islamic Revolutionary line. In the United States, though, oh no, we never brainwash anybody. We never indoctrinate anybody. No, all our kids just think for themselves. Everyone in America just thinks for themselves, and they can't find their own country in a map, and they all just happen to, and that's the dishonesty of the United States, right? There's a dishonesty there, right? The United States is supposed to just believe in freedom, just believe in individuality. Well, thank you, CJR. Just supposed to believe in freedom, just supposed to believe in individuality, there's no ideology here in the United States. No ideology, right? The U.S. military, in China, the military believes in communism. In Franco's Spain, the military believed in fascism and phalangism. But here in the United States, our military just believes whatever. It just serves the people. There's no state ideology in the United States. None. Right? There's no party line here. There's no beliefs. Everyone's just free to do whatever. It's liberalism, right? Everyone just does whatever they want. This is a lie, right? How do you think the need for law enforcement? Okay. Very good. Very, very good. Right? And that liberalism is a big lie. If there was liberalism, if there was truly just freedom of discourse, there would be no need for COINTELPRO. Right? There would be no need for CIA manipulation of the media. There would be no need for congressional hearings and McCarthyism and the House Un-American Activities Committee. There is clearly ideology in the United States. There is clearly a ruling ideology. There is clearly a ruling viewpoint that pushes its own line. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, did I miss another super chat? I think I got all the super chats here. Cooperatives, science fiction novels. All right, so we're talking about young pioneers. That's done. All right, the state capitalist notion. All right, well, this is out there, right? It's what they call the third camp Trotskyites generally put this out, but other people put it out as well, right? The idea is that Trotsky, he didn't like Stalin. He declared that the USSR under Stalin was what he called a degenerated workers' state. But then there were followers of Trotsky in New York City. They call them the New York intellectuals. This is a whole book about them, actually, which I draw heavily from in my synthetic left research. It's called The New York Intellectuals by Alan M. Wald. And it is a whole history of this grouping in New York City. They called the New York intellectuals Trotskyites who broke with Trotsky. And they said, no, the Soviet Union's not a degenerated workers' state. It's not a deformed workers' state. The Soviet Union is state capitalism. That was the New York intellectuals, they were called. Max Shachtman was probably the most influential figure among them. There was also James Burnham. There was also Martin Aburn. There was, who else? And eventually out of that, you got Susan Sontag, you got Irving Kristol, the father of neoconservatism, but they broke with Trotsky, and Tony Cliff in the UK, very good one, Joseph, right, and they argued that the Soviet Union was state capitalism. State capitalism. In the Soviet Union, there was a new ruling class called in the state, and they were exploiting the workers, and the Soviet Union was capitalism, just everything was run by the state. Well, the problem with that argument is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what capitalism is. Capitalism is not simply one group of people owning and controlling the means of production. It's one group of people owning and controlling the means of production to make profits. Let me emphasize that. Frederick Engels said that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital, meaning houses only get built, so money can be made off them. Food is only grown, so money can be made off them. Under capitalism, profits are in command, as Mao said. Capitalism is a system of production organized for profit. So simply saying that in the Soviet Union, which is true, there was a party elite, there was a party bureaucracy, there was a nomenclatura, or what's the correct word for it? There was a group of people in the party. There was party elites who had bigger houses than other people, had nicer cars than other people. Simply saying that existed does not prove it's capitalist, because capitalism is production organized for profit. Not saying that, there was this group of people who had, disproportionate power and a little more, wealth than other people, right? Soviet bureaucrats, maybe they had bigger houses, maybe they had bigger cars than everybody else, but they weren't, gazillionaires and millionaires and billionaires, right? They lived better than average workers did, no question about it. But their money, their wages came out of the same surplus that everyone's wages came out of, right? That they were bureaucrats. They were bureaucrats. They were not capitalists, right? The capitalist's interest is contrary to the interest of his employees. The lower the worker gets paid, the more money the capitalist makes. The higher the wage of the worker, the less profits the capitalist gets. The capitalist wants to drive the wages of his employees down so that he can maximize his own profits. The worker wants to maximize his own wages, and that cuts into the profits of the capitalist. There is a contrary interest. The capitalist wants to hire as few workers as possible to maximize his own profits. The worker wants to be employed, right? So there are contrary interests there. The Soviet bureaucracy wanted the Soviet people and Soviet society overall to become wealthier so that they could get wealthier and their position would be more solidified, right? That the definition of a ruling class, not a ruling clique, not a bureaucracy, not a privileged group, but a ruling class. A ruling class has contrary interests to other classes. However, the Soviet bureaucracy had the same interests as the Soviet working class. They had privileges, they had bureaucratic privilege. But, the fall of the Soviet Union, great example, right? The fall of the Soviet Union was the destruction of the Soviet bureaucracy. The Soviet bureaucracy was broken apart and Western capitalism set up shop in the former Soviet Union. Did that benefit Russian workers? No, right? If they were a separate class, right? If the bureaucracy of the former Soviet Union had been a separate class, right? If that class had been broken apart, it would have been good for the workers. Well, no, it was bad for them, right? I mean, that simply arguing that there is a privileged bureaucracy in a socialist state does not make it capitalist. Capitalism is production for profit. And in the Soviet Union, you had state central planning, and production was not carried out to make profits. It was carried out according to a state central plan, right? The Soviet Union did all kinds of stuff that did not make profits for people, that it was good for society overall, like building huge power plants, like, industrializing the whole country. They had a state central plan. They planned out their economy and carried it out. They didn't simply say, okay, okay, you're the bureaucrat and head of this industry. What'll make you more money? Okay, it's not how it worked. There was a state that capitalism is the rule of profits. Socialism is rational state central planning. The Soviet Union did not have a capitalist economy. It had a privileged bureaucracy. Great example. And actually, I think this comes from Trotsky, of all people. And I'm not a fan of Trotsky, but, Trotsky could spell these things out because he was not, in the Soviet government anymore. So he could speak more explicitly, right? The Soviet government, it was necessary for them to speak very carefully. They were representing the Soviet state. Trotsky, that's why I encourage people, as much as I don't like Trotsky and I denounce his theory of permanent revolution, there's a little more candor and honesty there, and there's a nitpicky criticism, but he understood how the Soviet Union worked because he helped build it. And Trotsky makes the analogy, I've made this analogy many times because it's accurate, of what is a bureaucracy. So if you're building socialism in a country that is impoverished, right, in a country that has historically been poor, you're not going to have huge surpluses of food at first. There's going to be limited amounts of food. So you're going to have to ration the food and make sure that everyone gets some food. Make sure that one group of people doesn't get more food than other people and let other people starve. You're going to have to ration as you plan out the economy. You're going to have to say, okay, you get this much, and you're going to have to decide who gets what. So if you're rationing the food to make sure that everyone gets enough food, you're going to have a guard that makes sure that as they're handing out that bread to people, nobody cuts in the line and nobody punches somebody else and takes their bread. You're going to have a guard, somebody who's the guard who makes sure that the rules are enforced and that everyone gets their ration. But here's the problem. That guard is taking on way more responsibility than everybody else because he is taking on the responsibility of being the guard. He's not just one of the people in the line getting their little piece of food. He's taking on the responsibility of being the guard. So he's going to demand that, okay, fine, I'll be the guard, but I get I get a bigger slice of bread than everybody else because I'm taking on the line of being the guard. So he's going to get a bureaucratic privilege because he's the guard. That's the bureaucracy. But then the question becomes, how do you prevent the bureaucracy from just taking their bread and overturning socialism, right? How do you control the bureaucracy? And how do you prevent something like in the USSR? In the USSR collapsed because half the bureaucracy just threw in the towel. Half the government bureaucracy in the USSR, pretty big chunk of it, just said, you know what, yeah, we're done with this. And they threw in the towel and surrendered. How do you prevent that from happening? Well, Stalin and the 1930s Soviet Union, the way they prevented it was with a police state and Yezhovshchina. And, they had a secret police, and if you were conspiring or something like that, you disappeared in the middle of the night. There was a police state apparatus. There was a highly politicized secret police that made sure that anyone who seemed like they were going to dismantle socialism or work against socialism was dealt with. That was one way of doing it. After Stalin's death, you have Khrushchev's secret speech, you have the bureaucracy becoming less and less revolutionary, and the Soviet Union eventually falls. Well, what was another method? Mao had a different method of dealing with the bureaucracy. He said, we're going to mobilize society to constantly be kicking the bureaucracy's ass, the Cultural Revolution, right? We're going to mobilize mobs of Red Guard youth that'll constantly be terrorizing the bureaucracy. Are you a capitalist roader? And raiding their, and we're going to, instead of having a secret police do it, we're going to have a mobilization of mobs of people, and we're going to have like mob rule kind of to control and kick the ass of the bureaucracy. Well, that didn't turn out too well either. Didn't turn out too well, right? The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. Mob rule, not good. Police state rule, not good. So how do you deal with this question of bureaucracy? This has been really the question that has defined 20th century communism. How do you deal with bureaucracy? How do you prevent the bureaucracy from doing what the Soviet bureaucracy did and surrendering? Well, China has found the answer. You create other ways for people to move up in society. You enable a market sector, right? If somebody in the Soviet Union, the only way you could get ahead, the only way you could get more money than everybody else was to get into the party bureaucracy. So a lot of people joined the Communist Party, didn't believe in communism. They just wanted a bigger slice of bread than everybody else. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? But in China, they said, okay, the Communist Party is for people who believe in communism. But if you just want to make money, go start a tech company. Go start a real estate company. And they created the market sector for the place for people that are just ambitious, just greedy, just want to get ahead. They go into the market sector. Meanwhile, the Communist Party remains only for people that are committed to communism. So the Communist Party becomes this ideological core, but people that just want to get ahead can go into the market sector, and the party controls the market sector. This is the method through which this problem of bureaucracy has been resolved, right? Is that if the bureaucracy is the only place where people can become wealthy, or the only place where people can, quote unquote, advance in a society, that's where the problem starts. Because, at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, about half the Soviet Communist Party didn't believe in communism, right? So you have to make an area for social mobility to take place, for people to be ambitious, for people to get ahead in the market sector. So the party is only for people that are committed to the ideology. The party is for people who believe in communism, not for people who want to get rich, right? And President Xi Jinping is cracking down in the party on all kinds of bribery and all that. In China, they've done that, right? If you want to get rich in China, you don't join the Chinese Communist Party, right? If you want to get rich in China, you go into the private sector. The Communist Party is for people who are loyal to the party line. Cuba is adjusting to be more like this, right? North Korea would like to adjust to be more like this. This is a much better method of purifying the bureaucracy. That the police state stuff under Stalin, it worked for a little while. The Cultural Revolution, pretty much a nightmare, right? That ultimately, the way to make sure that the bureaucracy remains true to revolutionary principles is to make sure that it doesn't become the only place where people can advance. And this is what we've learned from communism in the 20th century. And this is the question of bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is not a capitalist class. A bureaucracy is a different kind of entity. Now I know there's people in here agreeing with me, there's people in here disagreeing with me, and that's okay. But this is what I'm explaining to you, right? That the problem of bureaucracy, right, is resolved by having a state sector. When you have an overall state central plan, right? When you have an overall state central plan, when the means of production are controlled by the state, but you allow people to start their own companies and start their own businesses and start their own hotels and their own restaurants and their own little tech startups, but the party controls them, that is a mechanism for making sure you don't have this problem that plagued the Soviet Union of a counter-revolutionary wing of the bureaucracy developing. So I hope that that answered the question. But yeah, a bureaucracy is not a class. A class and a bureaucracy are two different things. And that, you know, nomenclature existed in the Soviet Union. It exists in China. It exists in Cuba. Every socialist country is going to have, is it nomenclatura, nomenclature? There's correct terms for it. A new, that's going to exist, right? If you're the head of a state-run, look at it. Look at the United States right now. Do you think Pentagon generals don't make huge salaries? I mean, do you think that the person who's the CEO of PBS, which is a government-funded TV station, I mean, it's like, yes, people that do very, very important jobs in state-run economies are going to demand that they get paid a lot for it, because they're harder to replace, and they're taking on a huge responsibility, right? I mean, and that's, as long as there is scarcity, and that's what people don't understand. People say, well, bureaucracy should be separate from ambition. But in China, there are billionaires in the party. Well, wouldn't you rather have the billionaires in the party than outside of the party? Wouldn't you rather have billionaires constantly being held accountable to party standards, right? Because the party is held to higher standards of discipline, right, than the population, right? If you're in the party and you get caught taking bribes, you're in way more trouble than an average person is for getting caught taking bribes. I mean, I'd rather have billionaires be in the party and be forced to obey the party's discipline than just doing their own thing. I think it's a good thing. But anyway, but the point that I was making, what was the point I was making? Oh, right, is that equality, right? This is the biggest pet peeve of mine. I was taught in school that communism believes that everyone should get paid the exact same wage no matter how hard they work. And then people are like, oh, well, communists want to make everyone equal. Well, look, in the Soviet Union or in China or in Cuba, this guy has a lot more money than everybody else. So therefore, it's not communist. Ah, ha, 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 ha. No, it's not rude. Keep super chatting. I like super chats, right? That's the thing. That's malarkey. No socialist country in the world has had total equality, okay? Equality, everyone getting paid the same wage, is not advocated anywhere in Marx's writings. Nobody in the entire history of the communist movement has said that when we come to power, everyone gets paid the exact same wage. Never. Albania was the only country in socialism that ever came close to that. And even they had 4 different wages, right? Albania, they had 4 pay scales. 4. Okay, so that's very simple, but it's still, they had 4 different pay scales, and the top one and the lower one were definitely not the same. So, the goal is not everyone gets paid the same wage. The goal is to rationally plan out the economy and create vast material abundance so that the need for coercion and the need for a wage system at all starts to fade away. The road to equality is material abundance. The goal of socialism is with a state-run, rationally planned economy, you create vast abundance. Is it because of Red Scare propaganda that the Libertarian Party is good third party over the Green Party? Oh, okay. Over the Green Party. But yes, the goal is to create vast material abundance so that class differences and inequality and the need for anyone to hoard anything starts to fade away. That is the basis of it. Like, the goal is not to make everyone equal, right? Libertarians, they always say, oh, communists want to make everyone equally poor. No, they don't. They want to make everyone equally rich, and the need for private property, the need for the need for inequality, the need for people hoarding stuff will fade away as everyone gets wealthy. The goal of communism is a world with so much material abundance, so much stuff, that no one feels a need to hoard anything anymore. That is the goal, okay? You read Marx, you read Frederick Engels, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. The goal is rational state planning of the economy so that we can get to a world in which there is no coercion because there's so much vast material abundance, right? So this idea you have in your head, communism is where everyone gets paid the same wage. Communism is about making everyone equal. Forget it. That's the only way everyone can be equal is if you have a huge amount of material abundance. Abundance is what creates that equality, not the government. Okay, you're completely missing it. So people that say the Soviet Union is state capitalist because the bureaucrats had more money than the average worker have no idea what they're talking about. And that's what I've noticed. A lot of times Trotskyism and, anarchist distortions, a lot of times it's not based on what communists actually think. It's an internalization of anti-communism. All right, Mosley. We can talk about Mosley a little bit. Is internalization of anti-communism, right? There was a friend of mine years ago who had another friend. He was a hardline Stalinist, tanky, Marxist-Leninist. And he had a friend who was a Trotskyite. And they were quite friendly. But they realized that probably the biggest disagreement that they had was anti-communism. The Trotskyite, when asked, the question that anyone who believes in socialism or Marxism in the United States has to believe is, why in the United States is everyone constantly just really loaded with anti-communism? Why is that? Well, if you asked my friend, who was a ML, who was a tanky, he said, well, that's because of anti-communist propaganda. But according to the Trotskyite, the root cause of anti-communism was reality, was Americans just knew how the Soviet Union was and didn't like it. Well, I'm sorry, Americans don't know how the Soviet Union was, right? I was taught my whole life that everyone in the Soviet Union was poor and starving the entire time. The Soviet Union never accomplished anything. I mean, I'm sorry, but no, Americans don't know anything about communism. Trotskyites believe that Americans looked at the Soviet Union and didn't like what they saw, and that's why they became anti-communists. MLs believe that what Americans believe about the Soviet Union is based on lies. That's a big difference, right? And that, this whole state capitalism thing, right? I was taught in school that the Soviet government wanted to make everyone equal and give everyone the exact same wage no matter how hard they worked. Well, that's not true. But if I kept believing that, and someone pointed out to me the Soviet Union, the guy who runs the steel mill, the state steel industry makes, 10 times what the average person makes or 100 times what the average person makes, I would go, oh, that's not real socialism. Well, I bet if Trotsky had been there, he would have gotten everyone paid equally. That a lot of times anti-communism is rooted purely in not understanding basic facts about what communists believe. It's believing the lies about communism and trying to, anyway, I'm sorry, this got a little confusing. All right, got a few more super chats to get through. What's my workout routine? Well, I do cardio every day on the treadmill, and then every other day, I lift weights, and the other days I just do cardio, and at least a half hour. That's how I do it. I lift weights, I lift weights every other day, and I do cardio every day. That's how I do it. And like today, the gym closed at 4 o'clock, so I won't be able to go to the gym, so I'm just going to do cardio. I'm just going to run this afternoon. Usually if I can get to the gym before it closes, which, during weekdays they're open, I'll do on the treadmill, and then one day I do weights, the next day I just do the cardio, and the next day I do weights. Okay. Worker cooperatives. Here's another great thing. What are worker cooperatives? Worker cooperatives are great. A worker cooperative is a business, like a bookstore or a coffee shop or a factory, where instead of having one owner, every employee is an owner. They have a share of it. And instead of getting paid a wage, they get paid their share of the profits that the company produces. That's what a cooperative is. That's good, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone's an owner. No one's exploiting anyone else's labor. It's a good thing. It's not socialism. Let me emphasize that. It's a good thing. It's not socialism. It's still a for-profit entity. It's still driven by profits. However, no one is exploiting anyone else because all the workers are an equal owner of the cooperative. That's what a cooperative is. Cooperatives are good, right? Now, to be fair, though, there are silly elements of cooperativism that are thrown into capitalism. For example, a lot of companies have an employee stock ownership program, ESOP. Well, that's not a cooperative. That just means that a percentage of your paycheck is based on how well the company does. You're not an equal owner with the CEO. It's just a percentage of your paycheck is what the company makes, right? It's almost like incentive pay or a piece wage, right? And that the problem is markets and profits are still in command. If every company immediately became a cooperative, we would still have profits in command. And The people who worked at, bomb-making factories would still want war because that would increase their profits, right? That companies would still compete with each other. There'd be competition between companies. There would be the elimination of labor by technology because the fewer workers in the cooperative, the bigger share everyone gets. That cooperatives are good, but they don't overcome the problem of production organized irrationally for profit. That's the problem, okay? And that's what people don't get. So, you still have the problems of the market. But cooperatives are good, and cooperatives will play an important role in a future socialist society, I'm sure. Cooperatives are better, but they are not the essence of what socialism is. All right, favorite science fiction novels. It's funny. Under socialism should Samsung factories. Under socialism. Okay. All right, so favorite science fiction novels. I will tell you, when I was in high school, I had a great time. I read Jack Finney's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? The pulp sci-fi, anti-communist sci-fi novel of the 1950s. I enjoyed Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It was kind of fun. It was a fun thing. A lot of little anecdotes and stories. What else do I like that's science fiction? Well, obviously, I just talked about Frankenstein. That's considered to be the first work of science fiction in all of history. I found the Arthur C. Clarke series, the Space Odyssey. What was it called? I found that to be rather clever. With the obelisks and they find one on the moon and all. I found that to be pretty clever. I actually would like to read. I haven't read the Three Body Problem, which is the big sci-fi book in China. Science fiction is booming right now in China. I think that science fiction is more progressive. Fantasy often has this kind of medieval nostalgia about it. It's talking about magic and castles and authoritarianism, and that there's often right-wing themes in science fiction, or in fantasy novels. For example, one very common theme in fantasy novels is someone's a king or someone's a prince, and they've ended up by accident becoming a peasant, and they spend the whole book or the whole novel or the whole movie trying to regain their throne. And that's an Ayn Rand thing, right? Every Ayn Randian thinks they're actually the king, they're actually the dictator, but it's only evil socialism that's holding them back. They're the great one, unrecognized. That's an Ayn Rand fantasy. That's really common in sci-fi novels or in fantasy novels. Science fiction, I argue, is more progressive. That said, though, there are exceptions within that. Heinlein, Robert Heinlein, is a reactionary. I mean, he's a sci-fi writer, but he is a reactionary. Starship Troopers is a demented love affair with British imperialism, and like the movie series they made based on Starship Troopers is like making fun of that. It's almost making fun of the books. If you read Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, it's demented. It's got a thing on the death penalty, a thing on corporal punishment, and it's all about society is great because we've adopted the 1800s British system for outer space or something. It's pretty twisted. But then again, and like I said, there are exceptions within everything. But yeah, sci-fi, because it's looking to the future, is more progressive. Whereas fantasy is more reactionary. But there's pretty progressive fantasy novels, and there's pretty reactionary sci-fi. But overall, I think there's a reason that the Soviet Union was all about sci-fi. That's true. The Soviet Union was obsessed with science fiction, right? And China today is obsessed with science fiction because they're progressive societies. The fantasy stuff, the Nazis were really, really into fantasy, right? For example, the Nazi Party actually, they used the story of the Sleeping Beauty to be an analogy for the Nazi state. And they would show Sleeping Beauty was the myth of the Nazi state. Right? And little kids in school, they would teach them that the story of Sleeping Beauty, right? And that the German people were the Sleeping Beauty, and the wizard who put Sleeping Beauty asleep was the Jew or whatever, and that Hitler was the handsome prince who wakes up the German people. It's sick, right? And that fantasy and that kind of knights and castles and mystical, that's a big part of fascism. It really is. It's a big part of fascism. The fascists tended to push fantasy, and communists tend to push sci-fi. There's a reason for that. And that's why, but at the end of the day, one can write a progressive fantasy novel, and one can write a reactionary sci-fi novel. But there you go. Now, someone on here just said Tolkien was fascist. Apparently, he wasn't. Apparently, there is like a weird, like, Evola-esque nostalgia, especially at the end of the Tolkien novels when they're looking back and it's like, oh, the world of men is coming in and all the magic and myths are going away. But other than that, people really can't find any politics in Tolkien. Some people thought that "You Shall Not Pass" was a reference to Spain, but apparently he wrote it before that, so he was not referencing Spain. And in Tolkien, there's not much politics there, other than the kind of like there's an odd like Roman Catholic thing about guilt and like vice and sin that you can read in with the magic ring, right? That's kind of about like the Catholic teaching on vice, right? Your vice controls you, your guilt controls you. That's kind of the Catholic teaching there. And then at the end, when all the elves and wizards and all of that go away and you have the world of men, and it's like sad because the men, are not as beautiful as all these magical creatures that are going away. That's kind of like a Julius Evola kind of. Julius Evola had this like nostalgia for, the organic state, he called it. So that's kind of a fascist-y kind of thing. But it's more traditionalist than fascist, actually. I mean, it was, the Italian fascists are the ones that promoted Evola, but Evola's ideas were not exactly in line with Mussolini and all of that. I mean, Tolkien's not a progressive. I mean, there's nothing socialist about it. It's certainly got a conservative edge to it, but I wouldn't call it fascist. It's Tolkien. And to be fair, again, people miss this, but the occult, mysticism, all of that stuff is on the right. People don't realize that. Prior to the Second World War in Europe, Christianity was the mainstream view. Most people in Europe were Christians. People on the far left were atheists and scientific dialectical materialists, and people on the far right were into the mystical, magical, occult shit, right? Now in the United States, that's all been totally confused. Aleister Crowley was on the far right. Julius Evola was on the far right, right? And that the magical, mystical, the Thule Society, all that stuff was far right wing. In fact, the leader of the Silver Legion of America, which was a big fascist group during the 1930s, was William Dudley Pillay, and he was an occultist. He did seances where people talked to spirits, and he was this occult guy, and he would be an occultist. Oh, okay, and that his fascist beliefs were in line with occultism. So the occultism, right, was associated with the far right. In the 1960s, though, hippieism and the New Age, the synthetic left adopted a lot of like New Age stuff. And so now people think New Age is on the left, but it's not. I mean, the essence of a lot of New Age stuff is very, very right wing, right? It's about, do as thou wilt and finding your own will and no society will hold you back. It's kind of an Ayn Rand, I mean, the Libertarian Party has a lot of those, what is it called? The OTO, the Aleister Crowley cult that's big among libertarians and Ayn Rand kind of people. It's big. Trumpers, there's a lot of OTO kind of people that are into Trump. When it comes to now there Wiccanism, there's like a feminist edge to a lot of that, but it's still got this like nature is the best and society was the best when people worshipped Mother Goddess before they started worshiping modern religions, and there's still a weird pagan go back to the way things used to be. That the occult in general is looking backward. Right? That's the essence of New Ageism. The essence of the occult is looking backward. It is about looking backward in some way or other. Ramiro says fascists worship Baal and Moloch. Exactly. Right? That there's some looking backward in all of occultism, all of New Ageism. There's an aspect of looking backwards. The New Age, the occult, that stuff is reactionary. Right? And I would argue Christianity is more progressive than that stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe there's Wiccans who go to peace marches and stuff, but at the end of the day, in the essence of what they believe, Christianity is more progressive because Christianity has a progressive message, and that the occultism, if you boil down the beliefs of any of these mystical New Age occult groups, if you boil them down, in essence, what they believe is reactionary. But that's my opinion, and I apologize if there are, Wiccans or occultists watching this who think I'm dead wrong. I could be dead wrong, but in my experience, based on what I've studied, which I haven't, I've read some about Aleister Crowley and his life story, and I've read some about different things, and I've looked into the Eastern mystics and the role that Eastern mysticism played in the CIA's anti-communism, and so I know some of this stuff, and based on my assessment that New Ageism is inherently inherently conservative. But, there you go. All right. Gramsci. I like Gramsci. I mean, you can learn from Gramsci's writings. He was mainly into the cultural sphere. He emphasized the cultural struggle, and he wrote from prison. And I think the reason academics like Gramsci is he doesn't write with explicitly Marxist language. Any words, any phrases that were explicitly Marxist, he couldn't use because the prison censors would cross it out. So he doesn't say Marxism. He says the theory of praxis, for example, right? And that it's safe for academics to quote Gramsci because everything Gramsci says, he doesn't say it in a way that everyone goes, ding, 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 communists. But the concepts are pretty basic Marxism. The ruling class sets the agenda of the culture. Gramsci was he was a communist. He was an Italian communist. And what's scary is nowadays, many people don't realize he was a communist, right? Now that he's this big thing in liberal academia, if you point out to people, he was the leader of the Italian Communist Party. People go, no, he was a good person, and communists are evil Stalinist. It's like, Gramsci was a Stalinist. Gramsci was a tanky. And academics, they quote him because he wrote in a way that the prison censors couldn't do it, right? Again, right? When people like a certain individual claim that Stalinists and tankies are the equivalent of Nazis, they're talking about Gramsci. And that's the thing. It's like that's what I was trying to tell Vosh and trying to tell other people, that if you claim that Stalinists and tankies are the same as Nazis, you're talking about Langston Hughes, you're talking about Albert Einstein, you're talking about some of the greatest people of the 20th century. No, Albert Einstein was not the same as Richard Spencer. No, Langston Hughes was not the same as Richard Spencer. No, Nelson Mandela was not, I'm sorry, but if you make that equivocation in your mind that defenders of Stalin, defenders of quote-unquote Stalinist regimes are the same as Nazis, if you make that equivocation, Nelson Mandela, right? Albert Einstein, Gramsci, I'm sorry. Some of the greatest minds of the 20th century were communists, right? And some of the greatest minds of the 20th century were not Nazis. So, Ezra Pound, he was a poet, give me a break, right? Che Guevara was a tanky, says Ramiro. Yes, so many of the greatest writers, greatest intellectuals, greatest scientists. So, if you're going to make that equivocation, you're throwing out, Grapes of Wrath. At the time, John Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath. He was a hardline tanky, supporter of the Communist Party USA, and there's lines in it comparing Lenin and Lenin to Jefferson and such. So it's just, give me a break. Give me a break. All right. Law enforcement and socialism. Obviously, there's going to be law enforcement and socialism. But yes, the goal is to eventually get to a world with so much abundance that no law enforcement is necessary. And I don't agree with abolish the police, by the way. It's not a rational slogan. Right, I think we ought to transition to having more, the defund the police stuff. It makes sense to me, right, to have more, more social workers on budget, and to handle things in a less confrontational way. And that often cops are looking for a fight and they're looking to pull their guns out and bully people and push them around, and that escalates situations. But at the end of the day, right, if you just say to people, abolish the police, what immediately comes into their mind is, okay, so my home is being broken into, who am I going to call? Right? My home is being broken into. Who do I call? My wife just got robbed on the street. Who do I call? In people's minds, that doesn't make sense. And if you confront people that say, abolish the police, right, what they say is, well, we want you to be able to call the workers' community fight back assembly militia that we're going to set up during the revolution. Aha, well, that sounds a lot like police. So what you're saying is you don't want to abolish the police. You just want a new form of police. I agree. I 100% agree. The way the police departments are set up in the United States right now facilitates all the problems that we're having, right? And that in the process of building socialism, we will build new state institutions. We can't just continue having the army the way it is. We're going to have a new army that's trained in completely different ways. We're going to have new police forces that are trained in completely different ways, right? So I'm with you, right? But when you just say to people, abolish the police, you sound like a lunatic. What you mean is have a proletarian police force, have a socialist police force. Aha, that's a slogan people can understand. Change the nature of the police and society overall. Community-based policing, community patrolling, right? These are real solutions. Abolish the police sounds nuts. Sounds nuts. So there you go. You know, but, all right. Why is the Libertarian Party considered better than the Green Party? It depends what part of the country you're in. You know, I mean, I remember when I was in college, a lot of people were like, I'm a libertarian. Like, why? Well, I don't like the two major parties. I think the government is corrupt. I don't like the wars. It's like, why don't you become a communist? Well, communists are bad. I'm going to become a libertarian because, you know, there's even now in the Libertarian Party, there's a big section of the Libertarian Party called the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. Really? Like, you're a libertarian. You're a socialist. And you join the Libertarian Party. But that's the problem with synthetic left. See, they don't understand that Ayn Rand and free markets are what the essence of being a socialist is opposed to. For them, being a socialist isn't about economics, right? They're like, well, I want to smoke weed, and I want to not have wars, and I want to dance around and be a hippie. Common sense never makes sense. and these people want to smoke weed, and they want to not have wars, and they want to dance around and be a hippie. But they just don't agree with me about, like, how the economy should be organized and whether or not starving people should be able to eat. So I'll join the Libertarian Party. I'll just be the socialist wing of the Libertarian Party. Wrong. The essence of being a socialist, the essence of being a socialist is rejecting libertarian economics. Libertarian economics is Satan. All right? It is Satan. Right? It is, and I'm not being hyperbolic here. Read the actual Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. It advocates libertarianism. Okay? Like, I'm not making this up. Go read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. It advocates libertarianism. Anton LaVey, the head of the Church of Satan, urged his followers to read Ayn Rand, okay? This screw everybody else, only be in it for yourself, that mindset is the mindset that actual Satanists want people to believe. Okay? This mindset that you have no obligation to anyone else, you should just be a selfish person, that compassion is a form of weakness, right? That kindness and human solidarity is a defect, right? That is the definition of evil. Okay? I'm sorry. When you see someone, if you saw a small child get hit by a car out in front of your house, the TPP, okay? If you saw a small child, you were outside your house one day, and a small child was hit by a car, you would want to help that child get to the hospital, even if you never met them before, because you have a basic human feeling of solidarity. Libertarianism is a philosophy that is attempting to deconstruct that basic human feeling of solidarity. It is about trying to make the part of you that loves your fellow human beings go away. And it's demented. And synthetic leftism is about kind of doing the same thing among the left. And that's what the whole thing I just read you, the Kamala Harris thing about that. If you reduce leftism to a crude Freudian manipulation, you get Kamala Harris. That's the point, right? That human beings are collective creatures. We have empathy and compassion and kindness. And libertarianism is a philosophy that says, nope, everyone's on your own. And that is the essence of what being a socialist is opposed to. That's my belief. The Green Party, I interviewed Howie Hawkins, the Green Party presidential candidate. You can watch it on my YouTube channel. I interview him. I mean, it was an interesting interview. I mean, people have been critical of some other things he said, but, he seemed okay. He seemed pretty sensible when I interviewed him. But yeah, I mean, libertarianism, why would a socialist join the Libertarian Party? I don't get it. All right. Oswald Mosley. Yeah, Oswald Mosley. He was Sir Oswald Mosley. He inherited a knightship, a title, right? He was in the House. I forget what it was. He had like a hereditary title. He fought in World War I. He was originally a conservative, but then he decided that he opposed the crimes, the atrocities being committed by the Black and Tans in Ireland after the First World War, so he joined the Labour Party. In the Labor Party, he came up with this very, very dramatic, like kind of Bonapartist economic plan. It was kind of it was like this dramatic, like immediate full employment plan. The Labor Party wasn't going to go along with it, so he quit the Labor Party and he formed the Union Party. Then he went to Italy and he went to Germany, and he was so impressed with Mussolini and Hitler, he started the BUF, the British Union of Fascists. What's interesting, Mosley was a fascist, but what's interesting is that he kind of emphasized the economics of fascism a lot more than other fascists did. But he was a virulent anti-communist, and his group were a bunch of thugs, and they went around attacking communists and labor unionists, and, they were, I'm no love for Mosley here. Oswald Mosley, in his writing, there's more of an economic element than you find in other most fascism. You read most fascist writing is just kill the Reds, kill the commies, right? Oh yeah, well we don't need communism. We're gonna have like national socialism. Don't worry about that, but kill the commies. That's the essence of fascism. That's Father Coughlin. That's the Silver Legion of America. You read most fascist stuff, it's like we have some weird economic thing we thought up, so we don't have to have socialism, but kill the communists. Right? And anti-Semitism and all of that. And Oswald Mosley was purveying anti-Semitism. I will say, I have never heard that name. I will say, though, that, Mosley probably on some level was more interested in economics and was trying to more seriously develop some kind of economic program. There was an attempt, that the King of England, you'll remember, stepped down. And they say it was because he loved Wallace Simpson. But the real reason the King of England stepped down, King Edward, was because he was a Nazi sympathizer, and the rest of the British ruling class was moving in an anti-fascist direction. But there was an attempted coup, and the idea was to put King Edward back on the throne, and then and put the British Union of Fascists into power. And the Battle of Cable Street, these were all decisive things. The communists played a very decisive role. If it weren't for the British Communist Party, it's very possible that Oswald Mosley could have come to power and that Britain would have been on the wrong side of World War II. It's very possible, and the British royal family might have liked that. But the role of communists, the role of the rest of the ruling class that had, was not liking the Germans, and it's complicated. But yeah, the British royal family had, quite an admiration for Mosley and quite an admiration for Hitler. During the Second World War. So much so that they forced King Edward from the throne. People forget about all of that. All right. Samsung factories under socialism, should they be nationalized? Maybe. It depends on the situation. Depends on the conditions in the country. It may be that you want to have, Samsung products, or there wouldn't be Samsung products anymore, produced by a state corporation or by the state. It may be that you want to have a private factory that's just, forced to work in the interest of the state central plan. It depends on what is best for the economy at the time. The difference between capitalism and socialism isn't the government owns it under socialism. The difference is we get to decide. The state gets to decide, right? Under capitalism, the owner of that Samsung factory says, this is my factory. I pay the workers whatever I want. I sell the products for whatever price I want. It's my factory. And then you try to regulate it, and they go, this is my private property, and it's like a battle to regulate them. Under socialism, the government says, okay, there's a factory here making Samsung stuff. Now, do we want it to be private or public? Well, okay, we'll have it be private. You know what? We're going to order them to make this. And the government shows up and says, you have to make this. And they say, but this is my factory. No, they can't say that, right? That's the difference. Under socialism, the economy, the public sector, the private sector, the banking sector, everything is beholden to the state central planner. Now, sometimes it's private, sometimes it's a market sector, sometimes it's public, but the state central planner that is not operating on the basis of profit, but is operating on the basis of what is good for society, sets the agenda. That's the difference between capitalism and socialism, and always will be, right? It's why is production carried out? Production upon a predetermined plan is what Frederick Engels calls socialism in his book Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. All right? Capitalism is the anarchy of production. It is the chaos of the market. All right. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Well, Obama created the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the idea was to create a trade zone. Basically to go to all these countries in Asia and say, you can trade with America and the United States, or you can trade with China. And it was an either or. That's what the TPP was. And it was a trade deal that would give certain benefits to all the countries that agreed not to trade with China. And it was basically creating a new Cold War situation in Asia, an economic zone of you're in the U.S. zone or in the Chinese zone. And Trump, like when he canceled the TPP, which was a good thing that Trump did, I guess it's one good thing Trump did, the way he talked against the TPP was like he thought it was like Chinese or something. Like, and he said, "Oh, China says they won't join the TPP. I think they will." It's like, no, no. Like the TPP was an anti-China trade deal. Okay, so the idea that Trump was like, "Oh, China says they're not going to join the," like, it was ridiculous. Hearing Trump talk about the TPP like it was a Chinese conspiracy. It was a conspiracy against China. So that was like, I was watching that and my head wanted to explode. What's the current status of ALBA in Latin America and the Caribbean? Well, obviously the socialist bloc in Latin America is under attack, right? I mean, Nicaragua is still going strong. Cuba is still going strong. Venezuela is having huge hardships right now, facing off military coups. They're much stronger than they were 2 years ago. Bolivia is in crisis. So, I mean, we're having a global pandemic right now. I'd say all those countries did a very, very good job handling the pandemic compared to the United States. Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela did amazingly. Bolivia is in a mess, and the people of Bolivia want to vote for the United Socialist Party. Yeah, I mean, oil revenue, oil prices are short, and that was the basis for a lot of the money that Venezuela was using to build a lot of things. But Venezuela has still built, millions of housing units. They've still done amazing stuff. They've protected their population from the pandemic. Cuba has done an amazing job. Nicaragua has done amazing things in alleviating poverty. Do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic where they were saying, "Oh, Ortega doesn't believe in COVID. See, he's a dictator. All the people are going to die of COVID." They've, months later, Nicaragua has kicked ass when it came to COVID. All those predictions, all that noise, all that steam, all that smoke that was blown by the U.S. media about Ortega and the pandemic didn't happen. Meanwhile, the United States fell on its face. Just saying. Nicaragua handled the pandemic very, very well. We were told the opposite. There was all this propaganda telling us that, oh my God, Nicaragua is going to die. Ortega doesn't believe in science. Rosario Murillo doesn't believe in science. No, Nicaragua, they handled the pandemic. Cuba has handled it well. Venezuela has handled it well. Venezuela has handled the pandemic very well, despite the fact that the USA tried to overthrow their government. They've been fighting off coups by the United States in the middle of a pandemic. So, you look at the pandemic situation, the ALBA countries did amazingly well throughout all of this, whereas the free market system, every man for himself, every state for themselves, every corporation, I mean, here in the United States, our individuality, not all on the same page approach, completely flopped. So there you go. All right, folks, it's been fun. We're going to have the patrons-only stream at 9:30 tonight, so tune in for that. I'll be sending out the link to the patrons shortly after this. But it's fun, folks. It's been fun. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I'm out, folks.